So you were the United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania from April of 2018 until January of 2021, just recently. So do you have a quick elevator speech to describe what was this job for people who might not be that familiar with it?
Sure. So the U.S. Attorney is the chief federal law enforcement officer in the district in which he or she serves. And the Eastern District of Pennsylvania covers Philadelphia and the 8 surrounding counties. So as the chief federal law enforcement officer, you're in charge of all federal prosecutions, so all criminal federal cases, and also all civil cases in which the federal government is a party.
So you went from being a lawyer at a law firm to basically in charge of a law firm of about 300 employees.
It's true. Being the United States Attorney is a little bit like being the chairman of a large law firm.
And you began that office, as I understand it, with 2 strategic goals. Mm-hmm. One was to increase productivity, and the other was to increase transparency. Did I get that right?
That's correct. I think it's really important when you're in an executive position to have clear priorities. And I felt like the office sort of needed some focus on those areas. Things had gotten a little bit stale when it came to productivity, for example. The case numbers had been declining. And I was concerned about that. I wanted to get the productivity up. And then when it came to transparency, we can do the greatest work possible in the U.S. Attorney's Office. We can be just humming along like this well-oiled machine. But if the public doesn't know what we're doing, and we don't do a good job of communicating to the public about what we're doing to protect them, it's almost like we're not even doing it. Because then it's only affecting the small number of people who are involved in that particular case. But if you do, for example, a really important violent crime case, and then you communicate that to the community, there's a large deterrent effect there. People think to themselves, okay, the U.S. Attorney's Office is on duty. U.S. Attorney's Office cares about robbery cases, cares about carjacking cases, cares about violent crime. Well, all right, then that's going to have an effect where people are going to be less likely to commit those crimes because they know that there are consequences to those. And so I wanted to do that. I wanted that to be part of the legacy that I left with the office during my time there.
You and I are both longtime members of the Federalist Society, and as Federalist Society members, I think one thing that we study a lot is separation of powers. So how do you reconcile the fact that in your time as a U.S. Attorney, you stepped into a lane that is more traditionally a local government lane?
I think it's really needs-based. You have to look at what the community needs and have your priorities, like we talked about earlier, and your overall mission is public safety. And if you come into a situation where the largest urban area in your district is suffering from a homicide crisis, a shooting crisis, a violent crime crisis because of the inaction of the local DA, I think you have a professional and a moral responsibility to put resources into those areas to try to keep people safe. It's as simple as that. I mean, I saw what was going on in Philadelphia, and I said, this is wrong. And there's many levels to the tragedy of what has happened in Philadelphia over the last few years under District Attorney Krasner, but one of the things that's most tragic is that the people that suffer the most under his policies are in fact racial minorities. Most of the homicide victims are racial minorities. Over 90% of the homicide victims in Philadelphia are either black or Latino. The people who are living in the crime-infested neighborhoods are disproportionately African American and other minority groups. And I think that the first civil right in this country should be the right to live in a safe neighborhood.
You increased prosecution significantly. Like in your 2019 annual report, you indicated a 40% increase. How did that translate to actual convictions or guilty pleas?
The conviction rate is very high in the federal system, and particularly in our office. It's typically in the mid to high 90%. So if you get charged with a federal crime, you almost always are convicted. We had an increase of about 40% overall in our criminal indictments during my tenure, going back to increasing the productivity. But that's 40% overall. When it came to violent crime, the numbers are even higher. We had over a 50% increase in our violent crime prosecutions compared to the time before I came into office. And on the particular hotspots in Philadelphia, we have these areas that are called PSN districts, which stands for Project Safe Neighborhood. Project Safe Neighborhood is essentially a gun crime initiative of the federal government. We had an increase of over 70% in our PSN cases during my time as U.S. Attorney. So again, we were surging resources into those areas that we felt were the most neglected by the District Attorney's Office during my time as U.S. Attorney.
I read that you had a record number of False Claims Act investigations. What were those?
So False Claims Act investigations are something that the Civil Division does in the office. Those 30-plus U.S. attorneys and the staff, somebody does work in, say, the healthcare area or the defense area or any area where they can bill the government for something. They submit a claim. And if those claims happen to be false, if there's some element of dishonesty in those claims or some element of fraud in those claims, then the government can sue and recover money for the government. And that's a lot of what our Civil Division does. And there's some powerful statutory remedies in the False Claims Act. Part of our job at the U.S. Attorney's Office is to look out for the taxpayer, look out for the public fisc. And if somebody's trying to rip off the federal government, we sue them, we recover that money, we do whatever we can do under the law to try to protect taxpayer dollars. During my time as U.S. Attorney, we got our numbers up to, as you indicated, up to record numbers of False Claims Act cases that we were bringing.
So when the numbers increase like that, do you feel that it acts as a deterrent to the people who are going to commit either these civil actions or
Absolutely.
crimes?
Absolutely, it's a deterrent, but it's only a deterrent if the public knows what you're doing. As I was saying earlier, that's part of the two-pronged strategy, not just doing the cases and doing the great work, but then communicating with the public about what you're doing so that the industry knows, whether it's, for example, the healthcare industry or the defense industry, they know, hey, the U.S. Attorney's Office is looking at our reimbursement claims closely. So we better make sure that we're not trying to rip off the government, because if we do, they're going to come after us. So you do everything you can to make sure that the appropriate players in this space know that you're on duty.
And you were appointed by a president who was elected in 2016 that maybe not everybody in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania voted for. Was that an issue when you started to set your policies and your strategies?
First of all, public safety should be a nonpartisan or bipartisan issue, and the rule of law should be treated the same way. So we always had a good message for the community, even if somebody didn't vote for President Trump, which is fine. And it's that way no matter who the president is. You have lots of people in a district who didn't vote for the president. So when we kept the message on the mission, I don't think that really was an issue. You also just have a lot of autonomy in general as a U.S. attorney from the executive branch. I never spoke to anyone from his inner circle about what to do as U.S. attorney, even during the selection process when I was interviewing for the job. And I'm proud of the fact that we always put politics aside and always thought about public safety and did everything we could to try to promote that mission.
You mentioned that President Trump would meet with first responders, policemen, firemen, and lately it seems like a lot of our first responders are getting really a bad rap, which is such a turnaround when you think about what happened on September 11th and how these people were our heroes. It just seems like in less than a generation, all of a sudden, it's really turned around. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that affects public safety?
There's certainly some of that, but I do believe that the majority of Americans, in fact the vast majority of Americans, are very supportive of law enforcement. People do want to see accountability, which is something that I want to see and is one of my core values. They want to see reform. They want to make sure that the police have the proper training. There needs to be proper behavior, and if there's any illegal behavior by the police, that needs to be prosecuted and has been prosecuted. Certainly by my office, we brought numerous cases against law enforcement officers in my time as U.S. Attorney, whether it was excessive force cases or corruption cases. And that's a conversation that's going on nationwide, which is a positive conversation. When you then jump way over here and you talk about defunding the police or abolishing the police, when you start talking about those kind of radical ideas, that is something that really does have a negative effect on morale in police departments, a negative effect on public safety, and is destined to fail and is destined to, again, harm the people the most who need public safety in their neighborhoods. They need the police to be actively engaged in their job and to be leaning forward, not being back on their heels. If you don't live in a safe neighborhood and you can't send your kids, kids can't walk to school unless they're afraid of getting hit by a stray bullet. All the other things that we want to accomplish as a society, improving education, improving the economy, giving people economic opportunities, building families, all those things are at risk and are very hard to achieve if you live in a dangerous neighborhood.
You saw what happened in Philadelphia this spring and this summer. Some people call it civil unrest, some people call it riots. How did that impact you as the U.S. Attorney, and what was your reaction?
It impacted us a lot because we were the only game in town basically doing anything about it, because the DA's office, and the DA in particular, was completely uninterested in dealing with the rioting, the arsons, the looting that was going on. Of course, First Amendment rights are important. Of course, peaceful protest is something that we support at the U.S. Attorney's Office, and I stress that over and over again. But if you have an element of the protest that's blowing up ATMs, torching police cars, setting stores on fire, rioting and looting, that's criminal behavior. That is not First Amendment protected activity. And so that needs to be punished. It needs to be deterred, which is what we did very aggressively. By doing so, we are protecting the First Amendment rights of the peaceful protesters, because a lot of this violence is being done by people who are hijacking the protests. So we were not in any way anti-peaceful protest. We were actually pro-peaceful protest. That's what we do in America. That's one of the ways that we affect positive change. But if you're doing all the things that we saw some people doing during the civil unrest, that's criminal behavior. To have a DA essentially cheering it on is appalling. We made a decision to get in there and hold people accountable. I took a lead role in that because I knew it was going to be something that was high profile and potentially controversial, and I wanted the public to understand that the whole office stood behind this. And if there's anybody who's going to take any heat about it, it was going to be me. I think that Philadelphia had the potential to literally burn to the ground if we didn't have a U.S. Attorney's Office that was actively engaged in enforcing the law, because we certainly didn't have a DA's office or a DA that was interested in enforcing the law when it came to those riots.
Well, parts of it did burn to the ground. I wonder if people realize exactly how bad it was.
Yeah, it was a scary time to be in Philadelphia. I think a lot of residents were very scared by it, but it could have been a lot worse. I think the Philadelphia police did an admirable job throughout the entire summer in almost impossible conditions.
Someone told me that as U.S. Attorney, your day started at 5:30 a.m. Is that true?
It was busy. It was a busy time. In the office, I would start the day with a staff meeting. I said, I want to touch base with people every day so that they can inform me about what they're hearing from their units and what's going on, and I can also give them guidance and feedback about what I want to accomplish that day. I was not a figurehead. I was not somebody who would just say, okay, handle X, and then come back to me in 6 months and tell me if it's done. I like to be in the details, and then I would travel a lot. I'd have a lot of, whether it was traveling around Philadelphia or going out to different areas in the district, I'd be on the road a lot. I sort of joked with my family, I wanted them to see that, especially my children, and I wanted them to see the importance of the job so that they would understand, why is Dad eating dinner by himself at 11 at night in the kitchen again? Why can't Dad be at every soccer game or whatever? It's not about you when you're in a high public position. It's about the role. It's about the office. It's about respecting the office, doing everything you can to have a positive impact during that finite period of time that you're in the office. And you show your respect for the office by giving it everything you've got. I had a role to play every day. It wasn't about Bill McSwain. It was about being the U.S. Attorney.
Is there anything that you were not able to accomplish as the U.S. Attorney that, if you had another years in that office, that you would have done?
I feel very good about the things that we accomplished. You can always do more, and it hurt when I had to leave. It was my dream job. And I was very honest with my staff and with everybody in the office when I left. I was like, this hurts, I don't want to leave you. I love this job, and I'm going to miss it, and I do miss it. It kills me that we're on pace to literally set a record for homicides in Philadelphia, and it hurts me that I'm not there to continue to on a daily basis try to do something about that. But I'm now looking for other ways to channel that public service passion that I have. I want to be part of the conversation about making Pennsylvania a stronger, more prosperous, safer, freer place to live than it is now.